Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Match Show. And today we are joined by the one and only Steve Marchand, who many of you will recognize. He was part of Andrew Yang's senior team in New Hampshire during the 2020 campaign. And we are also joined by Carlos Cardona, who we had on the show a few weeks ago. He's running for State House in New Hampshire. And today we are going to be talking about a very important topic, I think, to address as we approach what I think many see as the most divisive election in history, and perhaps one of the most divisive moments in our country's history. And I was just telling Steve and Carlos, it's important, I think, at some point we're going to want to have to try to unify and, get along with each other. They'll probably be good for the health of society. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. But first, I just want to have Carlos and Steve, both you, introduce yourselves for anybody who is new to meeting you today. And Steve, we'll have you go first.
Okay. First, Matt, thanks for this opportunity. I love Carlos. I love you. This is fun. I'm a New Hampshire born and bred guy, live on the seacoast, have for the last 20 years. I was the mayor of Portsmouth at a pretty young age, suddenly a long time ago. Much more recently, was a candidate for governor in 2018. Got about 35% of the vote, but since there are only two candidates in the primary, that wasn't enough. And so I ended up not winning in that primary. Met Andrew in 2019, very early. I got hooked on him, like I bet a lot of the viewers here did. Became a senior advisor through the duration of the campaign, remained good friends with him and committed to the cause. And I am here in New Hampshire helping candidates up and down the ballot this year in what I think is an awfully important year for the country and for the state. So still in politics here in beautiful New Hampshire.
And Carlos, how about yourself?
Hi, so Carlos Cardona here. I'm in Laconia, New Hampshire. What I think is the most beautiful city in New Hampshire, of course, in the middle of New Hampshire in the Lakes region. It doesn't get better than that. But of course, I'm sure maybe Steve would say Portsmouth is.
It's a tie, It's a tie.
I got into politics at a very young age. I got into politics at a very young age. I ran for office and became the youngest elected official in the state. I ran as a write-in candidate for the school board in the city of Franklin, New Hampshire, another great city. And I got out of politics, but jumped back in because, of course, there are two things that run deep in everybody's life in New Hampshire, and that's maple syrup and, of course, politics. So I couldn't get away from it, mainly because one of the main subjects or topics that we've been discussing on the campaign trail, something that Andrew Yang has always brought up, and it's rural America. And we understand that that's how Donald Trump won in 2016, or partially. And we understand that that's what it's going to take to unite our country. So I'm running in one of the most rural cities in New Hampshire, where even though it's a city, feels very much like a rural town. So it's normally a red district. Donald Trump won it by 14%. Right now, the polls have me in the state rep house race basically in a tie, which is remarkable because we're just excited that we're at this point. So I think 2 weeks before election, we have so much ground that we can definitely gain. So that's who I am. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. I own a business here with my partner in Laconia. We have two offices, one in Concord and one in Laconia. We have approximately about 115 employees. And I feel very, the issues that I feel very connected to is public education, homelessness, and addressing domestic violence, which, of course, with things that's basically what Andrew Yang has been campaigning on. So we met in the campaign trail. I hosted one of his second events here in New Hampshire and hosted a few more throughout the year. He visited our city more than any other presidential candidate, and is somebody that I call a friend and somebody who has had a huge influence on me as a leader. And of course, in our community, he's been somebody that has been able to unite libertarian conservatives and liberals and progressives here on the ground. And it's something that I admire, and I've learned a lot from him. So I'm happy to be here, and thank you for having me. And it's great to see Steve, of course.
Yeah, it's great to see both of you and have you on. And to kind of kick off the conversation, it really is interesting how Andrew, out of all the Democrats, he seemed like uniquely capable of being able to speak to people who traditionally wouldn't be so down with hearing what a Democrat has to say, just due to the partisan divides that go on in the country. He was really good at that. And both of you, as candidates who, Steve, as you said, ran for governor in New Hampshire, you were the mayor in Portsmouth. Carlos, in your election, in your race right now, New Hampshire is a state that sometimes does go red. Some of the areas did vote for Donald Trump in heavy numbers. So if you want to be successful in New Hampshire, you have to know how to talk to people who are perhaps hold different views than you. Otherwise, you're going to lose. What has kind of been like just your experiences running in, as you've been in politics and ran in races over the years, just trying to have those conversations with voters who, if they're a Republican, you're a Democrat, they voted for Trump, you voted for Hillary, or now you're going to vote for Biden.
I'll go first.
Anybody can take it.
Yeah. Okay. One of the things to keep in mind about most people's party affiliation, is that it is ancestral in nature. And what I mean by that is that people decide typically at a very early age what party they are, what team they're on. And even as the parties change over time, people are very hesitant to undo or to reverse their party affiliation. And indeed, with Donald Trump, we're seeing an interesting moment here because many of the policies, to the extent that Donald Trump had a handful of policies that he was hammering, they actually ran contrary to much of the last 40 years of Republican dogma, Reagan-era dogma. So he was rather anti-free trade and rather anti-immigration, and he would talk about it in populist tones that ran very contrary to some of the rhetoric that had been used over the previous 40 years in terms of more of a corporate Republican, a country club Republican. And Trump was taking that on directly in ways that really nobody else had done. Pat Buchanan had done that some in 1992 when he ran against Bush in the primary for Bush's reelection for president. So there are moments. But even then, people would stay Republican and they stick with the home team. They stick with Trump because he was the Republican, even as they don't necessarily like him or agree with a lot of his policies. And what that all means is, as a candidate, you got to connect. You got to do a lot of asking. Have people roll out their life. They'll tell you what matters to them. And what you'll find is they may start with an R, a D, or in New Hampshire, a U. We call it undeclared or independent. But they start with a life situation, a socioeconomic status, a relationship, a set of relationships. When you listen to what people's needs and aspirations are, as somebody who's a progressive Democrat, you can connect policies to that and your own life experiences in ways that very quickly can melt some of the lines of demarcation between Republican, Democrat, and independent. But that only happens when you begin by inviting the constituent or the voter to let them into, let me into your life, let me into your story. And that only begins when you show genuine interest in their story. Then the connections actually are rather easy to make many times. Not all the time, but many times. And so I think that actually is the key to being able to go to a, quote, red town. And we see, last thing I'll mention is that things are changing. One of the things that is happening in New Hampshire, and I think this is interesting in Carlos's district in Laconia, is that some of the communities that at one time had been hardcore Democratic in New Hampshire, Claremont, a blue-collar community, small city on the western border, Laconia in the Lakes region, Berlin up in Coos County in the northern region. These are blue-collar mill communities that in some cases had some tougher times during the last economic transformation. And what was once hardcore Democratic had been moving in a Republican direction. Laconia had moved strongly in a Republican direction. But you see Democratic candidates like Carlos. We got people in Berlin. We got people in Somersworth, Laconia, Claremont, all at Franklin that are able to make inroads that we haven't seen in a decade or more because they are appealing to the needs and aspirations of people that had sort of voted Republican. But if you start that way, the door is open. And that's why I think folks like Carlos have a real chance of breaking through in 2020.
Yeah. I love to kick it off to Carlos now, but his camera's out.
Nope.
There you go, Carlos. Because I know. Sorry, I was just gonna say. I know last time I had you on the channel, you really talked about how your strategy, to connect to voters is to not even think about the traditional labels that people would attach to them. You just think of them as a human being and try to speak to their needs and concerns.
Yeah, I mean, I think Steve hit the nail right on the head. This is why what we call retail politics works so well in the presidential campaign, in the campaign trail, here in New Hampshire. And it's partially because what makes successful retail politics is connecting with people, listening to them, taking their story and making it part of your policies or what you're proposing for America. And in my case, what I'm proposing for New Hampshire, what I'm proposing for my city. And the reason I'm able to make inroads is because, one, I've lived here for a long time, so I've connected with people first and making those relationships that transcend political lines. I live in one of the most conservative wards in all of Laconia, where I suspect I am going to do very well. Just driving any road in this ward, you'll find signs left and right with my name on them in people's yards, in actual homes. And to me, what that shows me is the relationship we've built as people, as community leaders. And so I also serving as an AmeriCorps for 3 years. Again, AmeriCorps is not red or blue. It's American. It's about community. It's about putting your community first. And when I was in AmeriCorps, I dedicated 3 years of my life nonstop with a stipend to making our schools better and connecting families to the education system. So I think that helps because it allows me to have a conversation with my neighbors and people that live around in the area. And so really what it comes down to is connecting with people, talking to them, and listening to their story and why they vote the way they do. But I think something else that Steve touched on that I find very common here in the state of New Hampshire is the ancestral political affiliation. I know a lot of people, including my partner, who don't want to stop being registered Republican because this is what their family tradition has been for as long as they can remember. And let's not forget, being a Republican in a certain time in history wasn't a bad thing. Lincoln wasn't a terrible president. So there's some good Republican presidents that did decent for the American people. Granted, I've been a Democrat my whole life, but the fact that I'm with a Republican, that helps me connect better with that whole ancestral political party affiliation. And a lot of these people will mix their votes when they're voting down ballot based on how they connect with people in the community and certain issues. One of the ones that I hear a lot about that I think it's funny that Republicans feel this way because it's a very progressive issue, which is property tax. It's something that New Hampshire brings up a lot every election, how we tax. And so it's something that I'm able to connect with people and say, well, the way we're going, we're going to continue, regardless whether it was a Democrat or a Republican, we're going to have to continue to increase property tax because we have no other way to raise revenue in the state of New Hampshire. So it's something that we're able to connect and talk about. I own a home, and so I'm able to talk to these homeowners and talk about, how can we give property tax relief to especially the elderly and young families that are moving into our areas that just cannot afford the tax rates the way they're going up. So again, I think Steve did a really good job of connecting that. And, at one more point, I do think this city is it went blue in 2008. It went blue barely in 2012. And then in 2016, it was completely red. In 2018, there was a wall. It didn't go completely red, but didn't go blue. It was kind of like a light shade of red. So I think this is our moment. I've been saying this for a while now, that this is our moment for Democrats to make the case. And not because I'm running, but we haven't had a Democrat, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, in the area of Laconia in a long time, in at least 10 years that has actually put Laconia first. It has focused strictly on Laconia and not really just on political party affiliations. And again, it's not to brag about my candidacy, but I've done everything I can in my power to focus on lifting Laconia from the bottom up for the past 2 years. And I think people are seeing that. I'm hearing that a lot. Yesterday, we made 300 calls last night, a group of us. And there was a guy that called and he says, I've never really voted Democrat, but I'm voting for Carlos Cardona because he has put the city on the map in every way, shape, or form. And so people have respect when you put your community first, when you show that you're fighting for the place you live in. You're not fighting for a party, that you're not fighting for somebody else except all of us here in the community. And he actually asked for a sign. And even though I felt uncomfortable putting my sign next to a Donald Trump sign, I felt proud that we're making some headway in some conversations with people that generally maybe would be closed-minded as to, voting for a Democrat or even consider a Democrat. So we're seeing a lot of change. And I think it's something that is spreading across New Hampshire based on the different communities that you approach.
Yeah. Or Steve, you want to add something?
Yeah, just a couple quick points. One, somewhat Laconia-centric. I may be showing my age a little bit. There are a few folks that I do want to give a little shout out at other times in Laconia, some more recent than others. Beth Arsenault, who at one point was a state rep, she had some roots that really allowed her to succeed there. Of course, the current mayor, Andrew, right, Hosmer, at one point snuck out. He snuck out that state Senate seat. That was a tough one. And then somebody I've known for a while, and I've got to give a French Canadian shout out, is the Hewitts. The family, right, they got some roots that go back quite a ways there. And part of what I love about Carlos' candidacy is that it's bringing in, frankly, it's bringing in diversity. It's bringing in youth. It's bringing in a completely different perspective in some elements, but a tremendously Laconia-centric message in other elements. I mean, the changing face of New Hampshire is going to require a changing face of leadership as well. And there's always a lag effect between when you see demographic change and increased diversity occurring in a community or in a state, in this case, slowly in New Hampshire's case, but it is occurring. And there's usually a lag effect of when you see that reflected in elected leadership. If you go back before I was born in Manchester, the French Canadian community was the dominant. There was a point where the French Canadian community was the dominant immigrant group by a mile in the state, but was treated rather poorly. At one point, we were the ones that were getting paid very low wages and working crazy hours to work the mills in places like Manchester, Laconia, Somersworth, Berlin. And then the dream was to eventually manage people, and then to one day there might be a French Canadian who would own the mill. Holy cow! Then we knew we would have made it, and that did happen. But and in fact, we eventually ended up getting a mayor of Manchester who was French Canadian, which for people my grandparents and my great grandparents' age would have been unimaginable at that time. And I think part of our challenge as a state and as a country is, can we accelerate that lag effect? Can we shrink that lagging indicator so that it doesn't take 40, 50, 60 years from when people of a new background are making real contributions in a community? They've got elbow grease, they got skin in the game, and when it actually begins to get recognized in economic prosperity, in leadership, elected and other ways, I think that's one of the challenges that we face. This is one of the reasons why somebody like Kamala Harris is so important to have on the national ticket, why it was important to have Andrew Yang as a meaningful part of the debate stage, because one of my favorite parts of working for Andrew, besides my affection for Andrew himself, was when I would go to certain places, events in New Hampshire, or when we went to South Carolina or New York or wherever. Detroit, I remember, for that big debate where he really flourished. And I would see young Asian Americans, especially boys, and they would see him, and I would hear them say to their parents, okay, I could be president someday. And this is what Kamala Harris is bringing to the table in so many ways. It's what Barack Obama brought to the table. I mean, it's what Julian Castro was bringing to the table. That to me was very exciting, and is part of the future of a strong Democratic Party in New Hampshire and in the country. So I love seeing the immigrant story continually recommence, and the last names may change, the appearance may change, but the story is renewed and it's beautiful, and we need to embrace that. And New Hampshire, I think, is in a place to do that really well. Laconia can actually be a center of such activity, and it's part of what would make Carlos such an exciting representative.
Yeah. I when I think about just how politicians are, whether they win or lose a race, or whether they're fighting for good or bad policies. If they're fighting for good policies, in theory, I want them to win. But it seems like some of those politicians sometimes don't do as good of a job as perhaps you do, Carlos, or as you do, Steve, in being able to connect with the voters, who do have fundamental disagreements with you at first, as it appears, before you have a human to human conversation. I wonder, when it comes to just the regular discourse that people have, not even from politician to citizen, but from just citizen to citizen, and being able to have healthy conversations with each other, how much do you think, perhaps impugning other people's motives or prejudging them without getting to know them plays into that? Because one of the things that really concerns me is, when the people are all fighting each other and bickering and arguing over kind of non-important issues, or issues that, if they actually just sat down at a table, they'd realize maybe they agree on. When all that's going on, nobody's actually fighting the real people who are the problem. And it seems like that's the Mitch McConnells of the world and the corporations, and I feel like when we're fighting each other, we're not able to be united in terms of fighting for us as a people.
Question, as Joe Biden has said for many, many years, you can question people's actions and decisions all you want. That's fair game in politics. The moment that you primarily question motives is when you make it very difficult to work together in the future, because then you tend to be impugning people's character, their very being. And I think that Joe Biden, he hasn't said it much in this campaign for a variety of reasons, but it's something that he said a lot in 2008 and in 88 when he ran, and as a senator over the years, and it stuck with me and I think a lot of people. And that is where we get in trouble. So trying to avoid guessing people's motives. I think, Robin Williams, before he took his own life several years ago, we think of him as this sort of kinetic force of nature, right? I mean, what a gifted comedian Robin Williams was. But he said something to the effect of, several years before he died, which, when you saw what he did later, took on extra meaning. He said, everybody you walk by is battling something that you know nothing about. Be kind. Always be kind. And I think that if you take that ethos and you apply it to politics, the default should be kindness. Not necessarily agreement, but kindness. People are battling things. People come from places that color the way they see the world. And it does not, in most cases, make them bad people. So that's where you try to stay away from motive. And I think that's a pretty good rule number one in politics.
Yeah, definitely. What do you think, Carlos?
I think that's 100% right on what I believe in. The reason why it was so easy for me to sign on to the Humanity Forward pledge was because I've always led with, how can we be more civil towards one another? How can we be more understanding? And if, as a leader, if I get elected, I won't be representing just my ideology. I'll be representing a whole entire district. And I have to do a good job at making sure I listen to everybody and lift them up. So something that was always very touching was the fact that when Andrew Yang met somebody on the ground, on the campaign trail, he didn't care where they stood on issues. All he cared about is like, let me hear their story and let me see how I can connect their story to UBI and how we can work together as a community to, one, get me elected so I can pass UBI, and two, so that that person's life become better. And I think the more we do that on the campaign trail, again, I think immediately about my neighbors, my partner. I have had friends in the political spectrum that lean on my side of issues. They call themselves progressives, and they would call somebody like my partner the vote for Trump, or they would consider voting for Trump a Nazi or whatever name they come up with. And let's think about that. That had a huge impact on Hillary Clinton's race when her campaign started calling people names on the campaign trail. And we heard it over and over again on the campaign trail, and it was nonstop, and it was divisive, and it was like, it wasn't productive. If the ultimate goal is to put somebody down, then fine, you go do that. If the ultimate goal is to serve people, to get their vote so that you can do the job wherever you're heading into, then it needs to start by listening to that person and being kind to that person. It's something I posted that on Twitter a couple of days ago. I said, if you're going to be anything, be kind. It doesn't cost us anything to be nice to one another, and it doesn't mean that we have to agree. It just means that we're going to be pleasant, that we're going to treat each other as humans, and treat the way we want to be treated. And honestly, that's very American. It's only in recent history that we've gotten away from that way of doing politics, and we just have to, like most things in this century, we just have to re-own that narrative. We have let Donald Trump take the narrative on a lot of issues, and I think it's about time that we take those back. I'm seeing it a lot, where people go negative and we go on the high road, and people have a lot of respect for that. Most recently, back in June, my opponent had called me mentally ill because I wrote a tweet about, which actually this all made it into the front page of the Daily Sun, and not many things politically related make it to the front of the Laconia Daily Sun here. But, I was proud that this conversation made it to the front page because it needed to be had here in New Hampshire. And the fact that he used that to describe a openly gay running candidate while I was discussing LGBTQ, being LGBTQ and Hispanic in this state, and how sometimes when you're in politics, you want to quit because the discrimination is real, the racism, the homophobia, and you get addressed in ways that you or I, none of us would treat each other that way. And so, especially in my district, sometimes you get those loud voices that are not very polite. And so a reporter caught word of that, and he approached me and he wanted to talk to me about my opponent, and he thought I was going to bash my opponent. And instead I said, I would love for my opponent to sit down one day with me and talk to me and find out why, instead of me voting for him, I am running against him. And that conversation happened. And as soon as that conversation happened, we befriended each other. And it just, when we put politics aside and all those things that divide us, and we start with the things that unite us, with the things that make us great, with the things that make us good human beings, like everything changes, the conversation changes, our intentions change. We see each other differently. And it's exactly that. And still to this day, I had 4 Republicans running against me and some of my other teammates, like Judge Hewitt and some of the other great people running. We befriended each other, and he calls me like once a week to make sure I'm okay. He publicly apologized for what he said. He understood that that was homophobic content, what he had put on Twitter, and he had some thinking. But that wouldn't have had happened if that conversation between him and I, human to human, putting politics aside, him understanding where I come from and me understanding where he comes from, that conversation would have never happened. We wouldn't be friends today. We wouldn't be kind to each other today. So again, we have to be, it starts with us. We have to be willing to have that conversation with Trump supporters. And when I make phone banking, I don't want to call just Democrats. I want to call Republicans. I want to talk to people that don't agree with me. I want to understand why they don't agree with me, and tell them my story and why I'm here and why I love the city and why I want to serve and why I want to service them. And I think when you lead like that, everything changes. And I think this election has taught people that. There's a lot of what I call shopper's remorse, people saying, I wish we'd have united behind this candidate, or I wish I would have voted for this other person, because we're realizing, what truly matters, what we really need to address here in America. And I mean, I think in many ways, everybody's kind of united behind Biden, at least everybody I know in politics, because we understand the desperate need to stitch this country back together. The thread kind of has been falling apart over the years. And we've understood, at least some of the people I know, we're understanding what has gone wrong and how we've mishandled this conversation. And it's like a relationship. It takes work. It takes communication. And I think as a country, we've handled this communication the wrong way. I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done. I'm not completely hopeful, but I think I'm cautiously optimistic that, America always finds a way to get together and unite and figure things out. And I still have hope that America still exists, because I still see kindness in my community, in one of the most reddest districts in New Hampshire. I know there are others, but this one is a pretty red one, and a good one that Republicans rely over and over on. But I'm seeing a lot of kindness here. I'm seeing a lot of people just saying, enough is enough. This conversation is not healthy. This is not good for our kids. This is not good for anybody. So I'm very proud to be part of that conversation. And I'm happy that Steve led the way in 2018 to having a civil conversation, uniting behind Democrats, and teaching us younger generation how to do that in politics, because that was a tough one. I was pretty upset when Steve lost, and I was like, it was like, I don't know. I felt a little hopeless that day, and I remember seeing him at the Unity breakfast, and I was like, how does he do it? How can he face his primary opponent,
Carlos,
and say
that was a difficult morning? What's the saying? You laugh because if you don't, you'll cry. I mean, yeah. But here's the thing. I mentioned earlier about motive, and Carlos was talking about it. Sometimes people tell you their motive. Right? If you can't figure out the motive, don't fill in the blank, particularly don't fill it in negatively. There are examples of people that do fill in the motive in the political sphere that really do force the issue. And a very obvious example, when within a month of Barack Obama getting inaugurated, Mitch McConnell said, our goal is to make Barack Obama a one-term president. That is a pretty clear declaration of motive, and that is not positive. And you can see over the 11 plus almost 12 years since he said that, it's obvious, including the Supreme Court nomination process that looks like it will likely culminate in a confirmation next week. Those motives are pretty sharp. And so one of the things when I ran for governor, and I think this is going to be important for Democrats, even if we win this election, even if we win it with room to spare, Joe Biden himself has called himself a transitional president, and not in a negative way. He appreciates, given his age and where he's at and where we're trying to get out of with Trump. This is a messy period in American history. One of the things that I note often is every 40 years or so, the country has a messy moment that leads to transformational change. In the late 70s, it was Carter who was the transitional figure, while the country was trying to figure out what direction it wanted to go in. Ronald Reagan, I would argue, unfortunately, became the force that made a compelling argument to a large enough chunk of the population that he created a durable majority with a very direct message that was very confrontational at that moment, but that led to almost 40 years of the Reagan Revolution. We still see it in the way that the courts, the Republicans have their judges, the transformation of the NRA from a gun education organization to what it became over the last 20 to 30 years. We saw this with FDR in the early 1930s. We saw this with Teddy Roosevelt at the turn of the 20th century. And we saw this with Abraham Lincoln in 1860. So you can see there's a pretty clear pattern in American history. 1860, 1900, 1932, 1980. Here we are, 40 years since the last transformational moment. And I think none of us will say that Joe Biden represents a transformational presidency including Joe Biden. He calls himself a transitional figure. But it also means that the two parties are still in a struggle in this generally closely divided country politically to figure out who's going to be able to deliver a compelling, forceful message that is going to be largely aspirational in tone and that will be able to get more than 47 to 51% of the country to feel like they are on the same page. And we may end up, like I say, we as a lifetime Democrat, Democrats may like what the transformation would look like on the other side, or we may not. It is up to the two parties to very quickly and aggressively figure out what that aspirational, transformational message is, and then to say it in the clearest of terms in a way that won't just try to hope we can stitch it if we can just win working class whites in Western Pennsylvania. It's got to be bigger than that. It's got to be, is there a coalition that can get 55 to 58% of the country regularly feeling like this is where I want to go? And that's what the last president who was able to do that was actually Reagan. And we usually see a messy president or two before we get to the transformation. It was Carter and Ford. Before that, we had Coolidge, Harding, and Hoover. Before Roosevelt, we had, remember, late 19th century, we had a bunch of generally very eminently forgettable presidents, including the one that he succeeded when he was assassinated, McKinley. And before Lincoln, we had several presidencies that were quite forgettable, including the one New Hampshire president, Franklin Pierce.
Franklin Pierce.
We are due, is what I'm saying to you. We are dramatically overdue for the next transformational figure to come, and it could be 2024. It could be 2028. I think all of us that share my passion for democratic and progressive politics, really, we need to keep working from the very top down the ballot to the very bottom to develop a message and a set of messengers that are transformational in nature. And that means, look, you're not going to get 100% because there is a strength to the message. But we've got to get out of this loop where we're at as a country and have been now for a generation, where generally we're all kind of nipping around the edges, dancing between roughly 46 and maybe 52% of the vote in a given election, and wondering what the late tally will be in one of the 11 states that we think might be swing. That's been most of my adult lifetime, and it is going to change sometime in the future. So I think it's really important that that is how our mindset is, whether we're running for the legislature, governor, Congress, or president. And that's what I think we're going to be looking for early in the Biden administration, if and hopefully when he wins. Something will emerge out of that. New leaders, some of the people that ran in this most recent primary, we will be seeing again, either in the administration and or running for president at the next opening. It's possible that transformational figure ran for president already. They just didn't win yet. And of course, I'm not biased or anything, but I genuinely believe that Andrew represented a real opportunity at transformational change. Nobody can deny that his message was transformational in nature. He was not nibbling around the edges. He represents a different look. I mean, his own being, an immigrant's kid, the first Asian American male to ever run for the presidency, the most unlikely candidate ever to make it as far as he has, certainly in the post-war era, with a message that brought people together. At the first time I did an event with him up in Plymouth in March of 2019, we did a book talk, and C-SPAN covered it. And after we were done, there were probably 80 people there. It was cold. It was a weeknight. I'm like, who the hell's going to show up at this? But I liked Andrew. We had done some snowmobiling, and I'm like, we'll do this. So we do it at the Common Man in Plymouth, New Hampshire. All of a sudden, like 80 people show up in the middle of nowhere. I'm like, who are you? And I see them with Make America Great clothing and hats. I see them, I asked them after. I see Hillary, Bernie, Jill Stein, Gary Johnson, Donald Trump, never voted before, never going to vote again. I saw every kind of voter. And that was one of those light bulb moments when I realized that Andrew had a unique opportunity to be a transformational figure in the presidency. And I think that's what we need going forward. So I think Joe Biden is going to be a dramatic, positive change from what we're dealing with for 4 years. I just don't want the headaches anymore. But we are going to have to continue to build what I believe will be a transformational candidacy in the future. And I'm on the Yang Gang train the second he wants to do it again. He's not the only one that could be that kind of figure, but I think he is somebody who totally can be that kind of presidential candidate. And I think it's important for the viewers to keep that in mind in the months and years to come. This is the long game we all got to play because it's a big deal what we're trying to accomplish here.
It is definitely a long game, and I think that's a very good point out of many great points you just made, Steve. I was going to say the whole time you were talking about the transformational figure, I was like, Yang, Yang, Yang. And it makes like, people will laugh, but the title of the video is How to Unite America. And if I could come up with a one-word response, I would say Yang. I think he'd be great because his whole campaign slogan was, unfortunately we just lost Carlos, but I'm sure he'll be back. His whole campaign slogan, was not left, not right, forward. And that's like what we really do. We need what Carlos was describing earlier in terms of that conversation, Carlos, that you had with that guy who literally, called you like a homophobic, like pretty homophobic remark. And it reminds me of back maybe like a year ago, there was this guy who made a anti-Asian, racist, xenophobic remark against Andrew Yang. And Yang actually didn't like call for the guy to be fired. Yang was like, I'd like to talk to this guy. Yang said, like, I looked at his comedy and I thought, is this a guy who holds like deep, horrible views, or is he someone who is a up and coming comedian and made a bad joke and needs to apologize? I think it's just it's fascinating to think about.
Can I touch on that real quick?
Yeah.
Because I feel pretty strongly as a Hispanic and like a person. And I actually, a fun fact, if I win my election, I will be the first BIPOC LGBTQ in the state house. And this has been already confirmed by numerous sources. So it shows you how much farther we have to make it here in New Hampshire. But I'm not into the cancel culture. Like, I'm one of those rare progressives. And maybe Steve is on the same on this, but I won't speak for him. I don't believe in canceling anybody. I believe when you do that, you isolate those people and they become more extreme of whatever it is that you did not like. The best thing America we have is our cult. Like, the best thing that we export is our people. So the same thing with relationships and the same thing with people that are out there that we think should be canceled or whatever. Those people, we need to get them to like us. We need to get them to get to know us, to have conversations to us. What I find, especially here in New Hampshire, not always the case, and I'm not excusing racism or homophobia or anything, but most likely they've never interacted with somebody like me. And that's what I always come across. I had a lady that she goes, oh, you don't look Spanish. And, you could get offended by that, or you could immediately go and assume what that person meant by it. Or two, you could assume that she has never met a Spanish person other than what she sees on TV and movies. And you can have a conversation with her and let her get to know you and understand that Spanish people, we all look very different. We're all different. There's white Hispanics, there's black Hispanics, light brown Hispanics, LGBTQ Hispanics, like, the list goes on. Muslim Hispanics, Jewish Hispanics. One fun fact, people around here did not know that, like, there's a huge amount of Jewish people in Argentina. And they're like, really? Like, I didn't know that. And I was talking to a bunch of friends of mine that are Jewish here in town, and they were just shocked to know that there was Jewish Hispanics. So we just, as a country, we need to stop assuming and trying to, like, I think, again, Steve is right on, and I wish he was the governor that we needed instead of Chris Sununu, because I knew he would have dealt with all this correctly. But
and legalize pot.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I'm with you on that. You don't have to go too far with me. But I just wish people, instead of like being quick to cancel people, because we've all done something in our history of humanity as individuals that is cancel worthy at some point in our lives. And if you haven't, good for you. But we're all sinners. And I think it's worth treating people, again, kind, and listening to them and seeing where they're wrong and how we can help them, how we can educate them. And then, of course, there are people that are way too extreme and there's nothing we can do to redeem them. But I do think that most human beings, 99.9% of them, are redeemable, are worth talking to, are worth listening to. And instead of canceling them, understanding where they're coming from and how we can help them move to where we are or where we want them to be. And also, canceling is forcing change, and change can never be forced. I don't think it can be forced. So I believe that if you look at history in America, it has always been done over time, working over and over. And as progressive as I am, if it was up to me, we would have a lot of great progressive policies, and I'm going to fight for that. But I know that that's not where everybody in the state house is. And so I have to meet them where they're at, and I need to talk to them, and I need to convince them and do the work. But forcing anybody into our ideology or our belief is not going to change the situation. It's only going to make those people into being extremists. And I think we can do a lot more good by just being kind to people and like helping them out and finding out where we agree and where we can like build a relationship from there. Let's think about our friends. You know, most of our friends don't agree with us 100% of the time, but we're still friends and we still do things together. So, and then the things that you don't agree with, you worked really hard to convince them why they should believe in what you believe in. And that's my approach. But I think what Andrew Yang was very noble, and it would be very bad of me to not have an opinion about 2024. So since Steve gave his 2 cents, my guy is most likely 99% not running for president. I'm pretty sure, based on his age, and I'm sure he's tired of running for president, Bernie Sanders. I do have to say, and I had this conversation with Sam, Hayden, and Steve, and Christina Snell, and so many other people, Zachary from the Andrew Yang campaign, and Andrew Yang himself. Andrew went from my first to second a lot back and forth throughout the campaign trail. Something I am attracted to in a leader is how they're able to just be down to the same level as every person they're talking to. He would laugh with them. He would joke with them. A perfect example was my town hall that we just had Monday. Those town hall, if I was holding a town hall with Biden or somebody like him, it would be very formal. It would be like questions, answer, lights, camera, action, go. With Andrew, it's very down to earth. And this is why I love traveling with him when I had the opportunity to do so a couple of times, because he was just fun. He was down to earth. He can relate to our daily lives. And I think because he is like us, it makes him that transformational candidate that I know he can be. If you would have asked me when I first met him, did he have a chance? Absolutely not. But then when I saw him growing and the impact that he was having on the campaign trail, I think if the election was 2 months longer, he would have been in the top 3 in New Hampshire, no problem, just because he was becoming that competitive. He was attracting libertarians. He was attracting what all the other candidates were attracting individually. He was attracting in portions to his campaign. And I think that if we want an America that is inclusive of all, including me, LGBTQ, Hispanic, et cetera, we have to have a candidate like that. And then one more thing, we're talking about in America about discrimination, and something that I hate that we're not talking about is discrimination that Asian Americans have faced in our country throughout history, including concentration camps that we had here in our country. Some of the first forms of concentration camps that we had for immigrants here in our country happened to Asian Americans. So I think we have not talked enough about that. And I think that Andrew Yang would just bring that conversation. I don't know, it would heal that part of our history that we haven't addressed. When we're talking about, what we've done to Black people in America, what we're doing to Hispanics today in America, what we've done to LGBTQ, I think that Andrew Yang could facilitate that conversation as to how we heal as Americans to go forward. And while obviously I don't know what's going to happen in 2024, I do hope he runs because he also brings some youthfulness to the conversation. I saw so many young people traveling from all over to come here to Laconia to see him speak. That's what we need if we want to transform cities like Laconia. We need that vibe to come into our cities. We need a leader that is willing to bring Americans from all over the country and go where it's needed and have conversations. And he would talk like that on the campaign trail about policies, about exchanging Americans within communities, like how do we, because we're all different depending on what part of America we come from. If you go to the Rust Belt, if you go down south, if you go to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, if you go to Hawaii, if you go to California. So I think he's somebody that could definitely, and especially my generation where we feel so left out of politics and we always feel like we're rebelling. I think it's important to have somebody that is willing to bring that youthful energy back into politics, and I think he can do that.
Yeah,
Matt, I know our time is short. I wanted to ask you a quick question that I meant to ask you before. You were up in New Hampshire, about as much as Andrew Yang was. I cannot believe how good a job you did of covering every move Andrew made up to the present day. It's pretty amazing. So had you spent, what did you think of the experience when you were up in New Hampshire covering him? What kind of vibe did you get, both of the people that would attend, as well as just sort of as you traveled around the state with us?
Well, I don't know. It all kind of blends together, like New Hampshire and Iowa and everything. I guess in terms of like how the experience was, I always felt like just being on the whole campaign trail, like it feels like a once in a lifetime experience. I'm hoping it's not a once in a lifetime experience. I'm hoping, maybe Yang will run in 2024. It'll be the Yang Marchand ticket here, as Mark suggests. But I found the people in both New Hampshire and Iowa to just be really nice and down to earth. It's one thing. It's hard for me to compare, kind of think of Yang's energy at his events, just because I only ever went to Andrew Yang events. I never went to other candidates' events, so I don't have a base to compare off of. But I really like New Hampshire. Actually, I think it's a beautiful state. I like driving through it. I'm a fan. I like the low taxes, except for the property taxes, as Carlos mentioned.
It is true. We got very high property taxes, but I'll tell you, in terms of the drive, there are, to me, you'd be hard-pressed to find another state where you could experience a greater diversity of kind of outdoor recreation and the seasons. And, you've got unbelievable lakes right in Carlos's backyard. You've got a beautiful and shortest coastline of any state that has a coastline, about 1.5 miles from me right now. The White Mountains, the foliage in the fall, the mountaintops in the winter. It's Mount Washington's the highest peak east of the Rockies. It's you have a foreign border that speaks a foreign language, and you can't say that about too much of the, it's certainly the northern half of the country. I love all Canadians. I'm a dual citizen myself. But it's kind of cool when you have little kids and you can go for a 4-hour drive from the southern tier of the state and you go over the border and the language flips on you. And we take that for granted sometimes and all. But I love it. And to me, it's a little bit like getting your kids on a trip to Europe without getting on an airplane. And it's a unique characteristic of northern New England and our proximity to the province of Quebec and the good people up there. So it's and I think that there are things that we have lacked in the past that are kind of coming on board. Like we are seeing, especially in Nashua and Manchester, increased diversity, ethnic diversity, racial diversity, LGBTQ diversity. It's adding an exciting mix to the state that has been often has been one of the weaknesses in terms of comparing our experience to other states' experiences. And I feel like now we're finally catching up a little bit in that regard, and we are richer for it. We're better for it as a state. So we're a little biased here, but you don't have to wait till Andrew runs again. you come up here, and we'll show you a good time all the time. And, as long as you stay 6 feet away, you do whatever you want.
Darla wants to know if she should move out of California.
Yes,
Head to New Hampshire.
I know nothing about you. And yes, you should. You should come to New Hampshire.
If I had one criticism of New Hampshire as a live streamer, so from the live streamer perspective, is their broadband internet. The cellular connection up there. It's very spotty, and that's why I am very happy, to hear Carlos is all in on the broadband internet train. We actually joke about it last time too.
Well, Matt, one of the things because of the pandemic is we're finding an increase quickly of people from New York, the kind of tri-state area in southwestern Connecticut, greater Boston, Providence, people that are wanting to get out of urban areas and congested areas, and they realize now that if they're self-employed or even if they work for a major employer, their employers are increasingly telling them, like Microsoft did about a week and a half ago, you're never coming back to the office. So get some good internet and live wherever the hell you want and make it work. And that is making a place like New Hampshire. We're finding in southern New Hampshire, for example, a lot of folks that are saying it might be expensive by New Hampshire standards, but it's very cheap by Boston, Hartford, New York standards. And that has some long-term housing ramifications. But I don't know, Darla lives in California. If you want to get away from it all, bring some friends, whatever. We would love to have you here, particularly if you're relatively young, because we could use some more of that, to be honest with you. I'm still young in New Hampshire, and that's great. Okay?
Nice.
The older I get, the
older looking great, Steve.
It's happening already, and it's ready for you, Matt.
Awesome.
I want to put my 2 cents real quick on that. Darla, not only move to New Hampshire, come to Laconia. So the power of voters, of liberals, progressives, even moderates in New Hampshire, it's outstanding how much of a difference your vote will make. My election will be decided by approximately 200 people. That will decide what the reddest district in New Hampshire will look like. So yeah, as many Californians want to come here, by all means, come and bring your great ideas, your great energy and vibe. We'll happily welcome you. You can follow me on Twitter. We'll tell you where to move.
I was gonna say, my father, he's one of the people you describe, Steve, who lives in the urban areas, who's actually legit thinking right now, he works for the federal government, and they've been on telework since March, and they're on telework for indefinitely. So he's like, why do I live in Washington, D.C.? I want to have land, space.
I'm telling you.
I'll suggest New Hampshire.
I get some friends who are realtors or in real estate business. There are parts of the state. I mean, Laconia is a good example. Housing costs compared to southern New Hampshire, much less compared to Boston or New York or DC. It's a fraction of the cost. You're close to amazing outdoor recreation. You're right on a major, I-93, so you can get up and down where you need to go quickly. It's got a great kind of old school city center. A lot of these cities that maybe at one point in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s experienced some economic difficulty as we transitioned out of a manufacturing base and a mill base, have something that a lot of these newer communities that are more suburban in nature can never have, and that is authentic, old school downtowns, walkable downtowns, buildings built at human scale, these sort of things. If you go to some of these suburbs, that are wonderful in other ways, but they could be in any place in the country. It's McMansions getting built, with multi-acre minimum zoning. You can't walk anywhere. In fact, a lot of them, they won't even build a sidewalk because they presume you're just going to drive to everywhere. It's spread out. You don't know who your neighbor is. You drive to work, you drive back, you drive into your garage. You never even experienced the neighborhood. You go to a place like Laconia or Claremont, up north in Berlin. We're seeing a renaissance in Somersworth, which is sort of near the coast over here. Portsmouth 30 years ago was not seen as that desirable a place for people from away to come and start a business and start a family. It is now regularly one of the 10 best small cities in America to live in, and a center of entrepreneurship. And that doesn't just happen. It takes a relatively small group of people, often younger, who have an entrepreneurial spirit and frankly are in a position to take more risks because they often don't have families yet. So they get a little bit, they can take a little more risk. And it's often before it becomes a hot place to be. So real estate prices are less. The barrier to entry is lower. And those folks, we're seeing that in Littleton, New Hampshire, which I think is one of the most delightful towns in the entire state. And we're seeing an explosion of people from away who are looking to move to a place like Littleton and start their business. I think Littleton's an amazing small community. So I'm done with my tourist and economic development today. But I'm serious when I say that I think that we're really well positioned, given the unfortunate circumstances we're currently in, as people are changing what they're looking for in their lifestyle, their economic future, and so forth. I think this ends up being a really idyllic place for a lot of people. And it's not just on the seacoast, Manchester, Nashua. It's Laconia, Western New Hampshire, Northern New Hampshire. I think we can do it for everybody.
It's a good pitch.
Come on down.
I had one more question kind of relating to, back to the whole idea of, uniting the country, trying to make everybody live as blissfully as it appears people live in New Hampshire. If you guys have time, because I know we were going to cap this off at an hour.
I'm free.
I got time for one more question. I enjoy being married, so I'd like to keep that streak alive,
All right. How do you think the role of social media and like the internet plays into the discourse of how people talk to each other? Does it hurt or help? And what solutions do you think there are in that sphere?
Carlos will hop back on here in a second, I presume. It clearly has had a negative impact in the near term on discourse because it has taken away accountability. It is much more difficult to say something negative, personal, motive-based, and without attribution or evidence when you're, Granite Knob 37 and you're making a comment on Facebook or some other social media platform, and there's no accountability. All of the humanness has gone away, and I think that even if we want to assume that the tech giants, if they are realizing late that what they have put together is incredibly corrosive, and that society is starting to come down on them a little bit. By the way, on both the left and the right, if you want to talk about one place where there's an opportunity for bipartisanship in 2021, it may actually be in cracking down on some of the excesses in the world of social media, where you have people from, Andrew Yang and Joe Biden to Senator Josh Hawley in Missouri and others on the right who are coming together actually on this issue. Because of the incredibly corrosive nature it's having on our elections, on our communities, on commerce done poorly, on misinformation. So I think that there is going to be some response. It's probably going to have a federal element to it. We certainly seem to be heading that way. And I also think that you're going to see an increased number of people that are going to unplug from platforms that they find are having too much of a corrosive impact. I have 2 teenage daughters. I can tell you firsthand the corrosive impact of social media, as Andrew talked about at length during the campaign, on their development, their self-esteem, their relationships. It is stunning to watch as a dad, and I have seen it do incredible damage at moments to both my kids and other children. It's threatening their lives, to be honest with you. So I don't have a solution for you here. It's complicated, but I do know that there are people working on it, and it's one of the things that drew me to Andrew very early. Is he was truly one of the first candidates and the most sophisticated of the candidates to talk about this in a way that I saw firsthand as a father of 2 teenage daughters.
Definitely. Carlos, you popped out when I asked the question, so I'll just repeat it again. It was
Thank you.
How much do you think social media plays into the poor discourse that we commonly see nowadays? And also, just as Steve pointed out, just feeds a lot of the disinformation and chaos that just fuels the divide. And what solutions are there? Because it is a tough, complicated issue, but what solutions do you think there are to tackle it?
Yeah, I mean, from a freedom of speech standpoint, which I'm a huge advocate of that, I find it hard to find a solution where we can control speech. I don't think it's healthy to control speech. I do think that, it's important to have conversations freely without being censored. That said, I do have a problem with, for example, the fact that companies can have bot or robot farms for social media to sway the conversation, to sway the whatever you want to call it, information, propaganda that is fed to the American public. I'm seeing that very regularly. You saw that very regularly during the primary election, where accounts would pop up brand new out of the nowhere, promoting one candidate, and that's all you would see. You wouldn't see an actual conversation. Yeah, you would see. You would see an actual You wouldn't see an actual conversation. You would see just propaganda being fed and typos and actually, typos are a human nature thing too. But you could just tell that it wasn't normal, and it was the amount of brand new accounts that were promoting that person. So, and it was several candidates, and normally people who had a lot of money. So I'm not sure what the solution is, but as a young person that is 31 years old, that has kids, that is concerned about the future of my kids. I also suffer depression, which is something that I speak about very openly on Twitter, because I want people to know that we politicians also, we go through the same struggles, whether we'd like to admit it or not. And I think this is a healthy conversation to have for people to know that depression, it can happen to anybody, it doesn't discriminate. And I think social media is a big problem when it comes to mental health. And you hear a lot of doctors and mental health experts sounding the alarm. Suicide rates have increased in America. I think COVID has something to do with it, but also the fact that we're spending even more time on social media because, we're trying to fill the gaps in our life because of living at home in COVID times. So I do think that the next leader of America, of our country, needs to address the situation head on, because it's only going to get worse. Foreign countries have found ways to exploit that, and I think it is very dangerous for our very fragile democracy. So, and I think for our population, and in the future, if a president like Donald Trump, which he has exploited social media, wants to exploit social media to wipe out a generation, I think he could. And I think when Andrew Yang was on the campaign trail talking about robots taking over, he was always saying, it's not the way you think they're going to take over, it's the way they're taking already over our lives and taking over our jobs. And we need to find human solutions to this. And how do we lift each other, such as with the UBI? So again, I don't know 100%, it's not my expertise, but I would certainly, as a state rep, be open to getting advice from people in the health industry, mental health sector, and, learning more from them. But as a person that suffers, depression, I know that it takes a huge toll on me. During the presidential campaign, oftentimes I had to unplug for days and go away into the mountains. Even though I'm in the mountains, I go further north, and I would try to unplug and connect with my humanity and realize that, yeah, Twitter is not real life, and that I don't need to take those things personal. And there are people that it has cost them their lives. And I think more people than actually some of the things that we are already fighting for in this country. So I think it is something that it does deserve a kind of a red light alarm warning in our country that we need to address before it's too late. And I do think some tech industries have monopoly on this already. They control what we see. And sometimes it's feeding into people's addiction. I know that gambling for some people can be a problem. And the social media giants can easily manipulate what they see. And so, whether it's drugs, alcohol, smoking, whatever the situation may be. So So I do think that we need to address this before we go further into the future. But I think this also highlights the further why Andrew Yang needs to run again in 2024, because nobody else is talking about the tech industry the way he has. So, yeah, I mean, I do think it needs to be addressed. Twitter, social media is what has given me a voice and a platform, and I do see the benefits of it. And I have always spoken very openly, sometimes controversially. I have criticized presidential candidates, and I've gotten hot waters for it. But I have also been in situations where it has hit my depression so hard that I have witnessed the impact it has had in my life. And so, as a young parent, I feel that we need to address this before our kids have no way out. So, yeah, and thank you for bringing it up.
Definitely. And it was really fascinating to just hear both of your perspectives on this topic. I've told you last time I spoke to you, Carlos, I feel like you and just so many other candidates I've spoken to just really do embody that not left, not right, forward, not just a slogan, but truly a real philosophy in terms of how you communicate with people. Just really embodying that. It's very it makes your heart warm to see, you know what I mean? And I also appreciate you coming on, Steve. It was good to reunite finally. It's been a while.
Yeah.
I have the link to Steve, your Twitter, down in the description. Make sure everybody watching follow Steve. And I also have the link to Carlos, your campaign website, down in the description. If you guys want to see Carlos win on November 3rd, get Carlos into New Hampshire State House and start making change. And maybe if you move to Laconia, be your representative. Help on his website. Go donate. Think about volunteering, and let's do this together. Any final thoughts from either of you before we call it a stream?
Everything that needs to be said has probably been said. But this is great. I appreciate the chance, and I hope it will be. We can do this again soon. Maybe let's see what happens in this presidential election in a few weeks, and let's see what happens to Andrew. I think there's going to be some exciting news involving Andrew in the weeks to come before the end of this calendar year.
Interesting. We don't know what that means, but we will spend
I'm just saying.
The next 2 months thinking about it until it's announced. Real quick before you go, Steve, are you going to be on Nerds for Yang tomorrow night after the debate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
all right. So everybody, if you want more Steve, go on Nerds for Yang tomorrow night after the debate. They'll be doing live coverage, and I'm sure Carlos will have a bunch of events too. If you want to keep following Carlos, which you definitely should, he'll tweet them out. Check those out. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching, and have a good evening.